If you're looking for a fantasy football flex play in Week 13, I have some options rostered in under 60% of sleeper leagues. Keep in mind the types of leagues people play in and the depth of those leagues are very different. Zay Jones is currently questionable, but he had a monster game in Week 12, 11 catches on 14 targets for 145 receiving yards and 27.5 fantasy points. He's had 19 targets his last two games. Detroit allows the third most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. The rookie Kyron Williams plays the Seahawks, who allow the third most fantasy points per game to running backs. 2 out of 3 of his last games played, he's had 3 receptions, and he played 70% of the snaps in Week 12, had 14 touches. He led the running back room for the Rams. Dallas is a tougher play, but Paris Campbell with Matt Ryan has had games of 18-7, 23, 20.6, and 11.7 fantasy points. Might be just like a stash for the fantasy playoffs. Zonovan Knight filled in for Michael Carter last week. When he got banged up, he had 12.3 fantasy points. He could be the lead back this week. And Minnesota is a top 12 matchup. You can pause and read why, but Demarcus Robinson for the Ravens and David Bell for the Browns are two guys in deeper leagues to consider that have had extended roles. DJ Chark returned in Week 11. He only played 16% of the snaps, but in Week 12 he played 73%. He saw 5 targets and he scored. Jacksonville allows the 13th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. Romeo Doubs for the Packers might be coming back, might just be more of a stash play. I think he's still questionable. Nico Collins is actually a guy I like a lot because he's seen some pretty good volume across the last couple of weeks now. Just as much, if not more, than Brandon Cooks actually. The Texans are struggling on offense, but big wide receiver getting volume could mean production. Risky play, but with Kansas City banged up right now, MVS can be a dart throw, especially in a shootout game against the Bengals. Deeper leagues, you can take a look at DeAndre Carter, who actually just had a great game last week, 20.3 fantasy points. Justin Herbert's throwing the ball at a high rate. 11 targets for Van Jefferson across his last 2 games. 11.2 and 16.3 fantasy point weeks for Matt Collins the last 2 games. Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow are on the IR. Have to see if he plays, but Richie James has scored 13.8 and 15.1 fantasy points the last 2 games. Minnesota is the 4th best fantasy matchup for wide receivers, so if you want to throw a dart at Corey Davis or Elijah Moore, you can. In the event that Debo does not play for the 49ers this week, I take a look at Juwan Jennings, who had 7 targets last week. Robert Woods has a tougher matchup against the Eagles. Treylon Burks has been the guy in the spotlight, but he's seen some decent targets the last 3 weeks with 7, 7, and 6.